I'd been sitting in the lobby of Henderson and Associates for 20 minutes when Mike walked past without even glancing my way. Our mother was beside him, her arm linked through his, both of them dressed in matching Navy power suits that screamed, executive decision-makers. They swept past the reception desk like they owned the building, which was ironic considering I actually did. Emma. The receptionist looked apologetic. Mr. Henderson just informed me that today's board meeting is for primary stakeholders only. He said you'd understand. I smiled and set down my coffee. Of course. No problem at all. Mike had stopped at the elevator, his phone pressed to his ear, nodding seriously at whatever conversation was happening. Mom was adjusting her Hermes scarf in the reflection of the polished elevator doors. Neither of them looked back. The receptionist lowered her voice. I'm sorry. I know you work here and this seems... It's fine really. I stood gathering my bag. I have plenty of other things to handle today. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been expecting this. Mike had been escalating for months now, ever since he'd convinced himself that his MBA from Wharton and his 3 years as Chief Strategy Officer made him the actual leader of our family's commercial real estate company. The title was impressive. The reality was that he managed 2 strip malls and attended a lot of networking lunches. I walked back to my car, a 7-year-old Honda Civic that Mike loved to mock during family dinners. Still driving that thing? He'd say, keys to his leased BMW dangling from his finger. Some of us have standards to maintain. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking garage. Unknown number. Ms. Henderson? This is Richard Thornton, CEO of Henderson and Associates. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. Hello, Mr. Thornton. What can I do for you? His voice carried an edge of panic that he was trying hard to mask. I apologize for the confusion this morning, but we have a rather urgent situation. The board is attempting to approve a merger with Westfield Development Corporation, and I've just been informed by our corporate attorneys that we cannot proceed without controlling shareholder approval. I started the engine, letting the silence stretch for a moment. I see. The thing is... He cleared his throat. Our records show that you hold 73% of company shares through Henderson Family Trust, which was transferred to your sole control on your 30th birthday last year. Your brother Michael and your mother Patricia are listed as minority shareholders with 12% each. That's correct. Ms. Henderson, your brother is currently in our boardroom with 8 other board members, attempting to push through a merger that would sell Henderson and Associates to Westfield for $240 million. He's been telling everyone that he has full authority to approve this transaction as the family representative. I pulled out of the parking spot slowly, phone on speaker. And does he? No, ma'am. Not even close. Without your signature, this merger cannot proceed. But he's convinced the board that you're just junior staff in our property management division, and that he holds primary decision-making authority for all Henderson family business interests. I'd been working in the property management division for 5 years. Not because I had to, my trust fund distribution alone was enough to live comfortably, but because I wanted to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up. I'd started as a leasing agent, worked my way through maintenance coordination, tenant relations, and property operations. I knew the revenue from every single property we owned. I knew which tenants were struggling, which buildings needed capital improvements, and which acquisitions made strategic sense. Mike knew how to network at charity galas and golf tournaments. Mr. Thornton, I'm going to ask you a question and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Is this Westfield merger actually good for Henderson and Associates? Or is this about Mike wanting to cash out his minority stake? The pause told me everything. The board has some concerns about the long-term strategic fit, he finally said. Westfield wants to convert most of our commercial properties into luxury residential, which would displace approximately 60 small businesses currently leasing from us. Some of these tenants have been with us for over 20 years. And Mike's position? He's arguing that luxury residential generates higher revenue per square foot and that we shouldn't let sentiment interfere with profit maximization. I thought about Rosa Martinez, who ran the small bakery in our East Side plaza. She'd been there for 18 years, always paid rent on time, and brought pan dulce to the property office every Christmas. I thought about the bookstore, the family-owned restaurant, the martial arts studio where kids from the neighborhood trained for free twice a week. I'm curious, Mr. Thornton. How did this merger discussion even get to the board level without my input? Your brother filed paperwork claiming full proxy authority for all Henderson family holdings. He provided documentation that appeared legitimate, corporate resolutions, family trust amendments, the works. Our legal team is now discovering that most of these documents were either outdated or misrepresented his actual authority. Fraudulent, you mean? I'm not prepared to use that specific term without further legal review, but, yes, the implications are concerning. I merged onto the highway, heading not home but toward my attorney's office. What time does this board meeting end? They're planning to vote in approximately 2 hours. If the merger is approved by the board, they'll proceed to signing, and your brother has assured everyone that family approval is a formality that will be handled afterward. Meaning he was planning to forge my signature or simply claim I'd agreed verbally. Another pause. Ms. Henderson, I want to be very clear about something. I've been CEO of this company for 11 years. I knew your grandfather and I watched your father build this business before he passed. I have tremendous respect for the Henderson legacy. What's happening in that boardroom right now does not honor that legacy. Thank you for calling me, Mr. Thornton. What would you like me to do? I smiled even though he couldn't see it. Nothing yet. I'll handle this. I hung up and immediately dialed my attorney, James Crawford. He'd been managing my trust since my grandfather passed, and he'd been the one to quietly transfer controlling interest to me on my 30th birthday per my grandfather's explicit instructions in his will. Emma. What's wrong? I need you to meet me at Henderson and Associates in 1 hour with every piece of documentation proving my controlling interest in the company. Every share certificate, every trust document, every corporate filing. What happened? Mike's trying to sell the company without my knowledge or approval. James let out a low whistle. Your grandfather would lose his mind. That's putting it mildly. Can you also contact the board's corporate counsel? I want them to confirm to every board member present that no merger can proceed without my written consent. Consider it done. Emma, are you sure you want to do this publicly? Your brother is going to be humiliated. I thought about every family dinner where Mike had made jokes about my little apartment lease coordinator job. I thought about the Christmas when Mom had told me that not everyone is cut out for leadership roles, after I'd suggested we explore more tenant-friendly lease structures. I thought about Thanksgiving when Mike had brought his girlfriend and introduced me as the one who never really found her path. I'm sure. I sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes, reviewing documents on my tablet. The Henderson Family Trust had been established by my grandfather in 1987, when he first started acquiring commercial properties. By the time he died, the portfolio included 23 properties across the state, representing over 2 million square feet of commercial space and generating approximately $47 million in annual revenue. My father had grown the business even further before his heart attack 5 years ago. In his will, he'd been explicit. Controlling interest would pass to me on my 30th birthday, with the stipulation that I spend at least 5 years working in the business, at every level from the ground up. Mike had been 24 when Dad died. He'd immediately assumed he would inherit everything or at least equal control. What he didn't know was that Dad had watched him carefully during those years before his death. He'd seen Mike's focus on flashy networking instead of actual business fundamentals. He'd noticed the way Mike treated vendors and contractors, always demanding, never respectful. He'd witnessed the time Mike tried to evict a tenant 3 weeks before Christmas because they were 2 days late on rent, without bothering to learn that the owner's mother had just been hospitalized. Dad had pulled me aside about 6 months before he died. We were at one of the properties inspecting a roof repair. Your brother thinks leadership means making bold moves and commanding respect, he'd said. But real leadership is knowing every person who depends on your decisions. It's understanding that a business is more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's lives and livelihoods. He'd made me promise to work my way through every department, to learn not just how the business operated but how it affected everyone who interacted with it. I'd kept that promise. My phone buzzed. James, in the lobby. Corporate counsel is with me. They look nervous. I got out of the car and walked to the elevator, my heart surprisingly calm. When people imagine confronting family members, they usually picture anger, raised voices, dramatic accusations. But I'd learned something from 5 years of handling difficult tenant situations. The quieter you remain, the more powerful your position becomes. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. James was standing near reception with a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses who I recognized as Arthur Chin, the board's corporate counsel. Both men looked at me with a mixture of concern and something that might have been respect. Miss Henderson. Arthur extended his hand. I've reviewed all documentation provided by Mr. Crawford. I want to apologize for the confusion regarding today's meeting. Your brother's representations to the board were inaccurate. I understand. Is the board still meeting? They're in deliberations now. The vote is scheduled for. He checked his watch. 12 minutes from now. Then let's not waste time. We walked down the hallway toward the main conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see the board members seated around a massive oak table. Mike sat at the head, gesturing emphatically while making some point. Mom was beside him, nodding along. Neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. Arthur knocked once, then pushed open the door without waiting for response. Pardon the interruption. Mike's head snapped up, his expression morphing from authority to irritation in seconds. Arthur, we're in the middle of... He stopped when he saw me. What is Emma doing here? I thought we agreed this meeting was for decision-makers only. Richard Thornton, seated near the middle of the table, stood up. Miss Henderson, thank you for coming. Please take my seat. That won't be necessary, Richard. This won't take long. I set my bag down on the credenza and looked around the room. I recognized most of the board members, longtime business associates of my grandfather and father, mixed with newer appointments Mike had pushed through over the last 2 years. Mike was staring at me with barely concealed anger. Emma, this is completely inappropriate. We're about to vote on a major corporate transaction. The Westfield merger. Yes, I'm aware. Then you understand this is board business. If you need to discuss your work schedule or some tenant issue, we can handle that tomorrow. I'm not here about my work schedule, Mike. James stepped forward carrying a leather portfolio. Mr. Henderson, members of the board, my name is James Crawford. I'm corporate counsel for the Henderson Family Trust and personal attorney to Ms. Emma Henderson. I'm here to clarify some significant misunderstandings regarding authority and approval for the proposed Westfield merger. Mom spoke up, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced patience she'd perfected over the years. James, we appreciate your concern, but Michael has full proxy authority for family business interests. This is already documented. No, Mrs. Henderson, he does not. James opened the portfolio, distributing packets to each board member. What you're receiving is complete documentation of the Henderson Family Trust structure, including share distribution, voting rights, and approval authorities. I watched Mike's face as he opened his packet. The color drained slowly like watching time-lapse footage of sunset. According to trust documents executed by the late Robert Henderson and upheld after the death of James Henderson Sr., controlling interest, specifically 73% of all shares in Henderson and Associates, transferred to Ms. Emma Henderson on her 30th birthday, which occurred 13 months ago. One of the board members, an older woman named Dorothy Mills who'd known my grandfather, looked up sharply. 73%? Yes, ma'am. Michael Henderson holds 12%, Patricia Henderson holds 12%, and the remaining 3% is distributed among minor family members in educational trusts. Mike's hand was gripping the edge of the table. This is ridiculous. I'm Chief Strategy Officer. I've been running this company's strategic initiatives for 3 years. You've been managing 2 properties and attending board meetings, I said quietly. That's not the same thing as running the company. I have an MBA from Wharton. I've led our expansion into. You've led exactly 0 expansions, Mike. Every property acquisition in the last 3 years was researched and proposed by the property management team, analyzed by our financial department, and approved by Richard as CEO. You attended the closing signings and took credit in the press releases. The room had gone completely silent. Dorothy cleared her throat. Emma, I have to ask, if you've held controlling interest for over a year, why are we only learning about this now? Because I've been honoring my father's wishes. He wanted me to learn this business from every angle before exercising any authority. I've spent 5 years working in property management, tenant relations, maintenance coordination, and operations. I know every property we own, every major tenant, every capital improvement project, and every financial metric that matters. Mike slammed his packet down on the table. This is insane. You're a glorified secretary in the leasing office. I'm the majority shareholder of this company, Mike, which means every major business decision requires my approval. I turned to Richard. Which brings us to today's vote. Richard nodded slowly. The Westfield merger cannot proceed without controlling shareholder consent. And you don't have it, I said simply. I'm formally denying approval for this merger. Mike shot to his feet. You can't do that, This is a $240 million deal. Do you have any idea what your share would be worth? Approximately $175 million. Yes, I'm aware. Then why would you possibly? Because this merger would displace 60 small businesses, Mike. 60 families who've built their livelihoods in our properties, some of them for over 20 years. Westfield's plan is to convert everything to luxury residential, maximize short-term profits, and destroy the community relationships that my grandfather and father spent decades building. Mom had found her voice again. Emma, darling, I think you're being emotional about this. Business requires difficult decisions. I'm not being emotional, Mom. I'm being strategic. Henderson and Associates has a 97% tenant retention rate, which is almost unheard of in commercial real estate. We have that rate because we treat tenants as partners, not revenue sources. That reputation allows us to charge slightly lower rates while maintaining consistently full occupancy, which generates more stable long-term revenue than the boom and bust cycle of luxury development. I pulled out my own tablet, pulling up a presentation I'd been building for months. I've been analyzing Westfield's business model. They've completed 17 similar acquisitions in the last 5 years. 12 of those properties are now showing significant vacancy rates because luxury residential markets are oversaturated in our demographic areas. 4 are in financial distress. 1 is facing bankruptcy proceedings. Arthur was leaning forward, studying the data I was displaying. How long have you been researching this? Since Mike first mentioned Westfield at a board meeting 4 months ago. I've reviewed every public filing, every financial statement, every market analysis available. This merger would generate a short-term windfall followed by long-term value destruction. Dorothy was nodding slowly, reading through the documents in front of her. Emma, this level of analysis is impressive. It's necessary. Henderson and Associates isn't just a company, it's a legacy. My grandfather started with a single building in 1987. My father grew it into something that supports hundreds of businesses and thousands of jobs. I'm not going to destroy that for a quick payout. Mike's face had gone from pale to flushed red. You have no authority to make this decision alone. Actually, I do. 73% controlling interest means exactly that, control. I looked around the room at the board members. I understand that my brother has been representing himself as the primary family authority for business decisions. That ends today. Going forward, any major corporate actions, mergers, acquisitions, significant capital expenditures, or changes to company leadership, require my written approval. Richard stood. Ms. Henderson, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for proceeding this far without proper verification of approval authority. This is my responsibility as CEO, and I should have confirmed your position before allowing today's vote to be scheduled. I appreciate that, Richard. And I want to be clear. I'm not here to micromanage or undermine the excellent work you and the board have been doing. I just need to ensure that decisions align with the long-term values this company was built on. One of the younger board members, someone Mike had appointed last year, spoke up. Ms. Henderson, with all due respect, refusing a $240 million merger based on sentiment toward existing tenants seems like poor business judgment. I smiled. I'm not refusing based on sentiment. I'm refusing based on analysis showing that Westfield's business model is fundamentally unsound for our market position, and that the merger would likely result in long-term value destruction that exceeds the short-term gain. But I appreciate your concern. I pulled up another slide on my tablet. Here's what I'm proposing instead. A targeted acquisition strategy that expands our commercial portfolio in underserved markets, maintains our tenant-friendly approach and generates conservative but stable growth. I've identified 8 properties currently available that fit our criteria, with a combined acquisition cost of approximately $67 million and projected revenue increase of $8.3 million annually. Dorothy was studying the presentation with obvious interest. This is detailed work, Emma. I've had 5 years to prepare. I wasn't just filing lease agreements and coordinating maintenance. I was studying every aspect of this business and planning for the moment when I'd need to step into actual leadership. Mike's voice came out strangled. You've been planning this? To humiliate me in front of the entire board. No, Mike. I've been planning to honor our father's legacy and protect the company he built. The humiliation is your own creation. I closed my tablet and looked at him directly. You spent the last 5 years telling everyone I was just junior staff, too insignificant to involve in real decisions. You blocked me from meetings, dismissed my input, and made jokes about my career choices at every family gathering. All while I was learning this business at a level you've never bothered to understand. Mom reached for Mike's arm. Emma, your brother has worked very hard. Mike has networked very hard. There's a difference. I gathered my bag. Richard, I'd like to schedule a proper meeting next week to discuss the acquisition strategy in detail. Please include department heads from property management, finance, and operations. Of course, Ms. Henderson. And I think it's time we reconsider the chief strategy officer position. If Mike wants to remain with the company, I'm sure we can find a role that matches his actual skills and contributions. Perhaps something in business development or tenant relations, where he can learn the fundamentals he's been skipping. Mike's chair scraped loudly as he stood. I'm not taking a demotion from my own sister. You're taking a reality check from the majority shareholder of this company, I said calmly. You have a choice, Mike. You can stay, learn the business properly, and contribute meaningfully. Or you can leave, cash out your 12% and find somewhere else to pretend you're more important than you actually are. The silence in the room was absolute. Mike grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and stormed toward the door. Mom followed, pausing only to look back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger mixed with something that might have been shocked respect. After they left, Dorothy started laughing. It was a quiet sound at first, then grew stronger. Your grandfather would have loved this. James Sr. They both knew exactly what they were doing when they set up that trust structure. They did, I agreed. They just trusted me to be ready when the moment came. Richard cleared his throat. Miss Henderson, I think I speak for everyone here when I say we're looking forward to working with you in your proper capacity as controlling shareholder. This company needs the kind of thoughtful leadership you've demonstrated today. Thank you, Richard. I headed toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I want to establish a tenant advisory board. Representatives from our major tenants who can provide input on property improvements, lease structures, and community needs. My grandfather always said we're not in the real estate business, we're in the relationship business. I think it's time we formalize that philosophy. As I walked back to the elevator, James fell into step beside me. That was remarkably restrained. I expected more drama. Drama isn't leadership, I said. Dad taught me that. My phone buzzed. A text from Mike. This isn't over. I smiled and pocketed the phone without responding. It was over. It had been over the moment my grandfather's will was executed, the moment my father's trust documents were finalized, the moment I'd spent 5 years learning every detail of a business Mike had treated as his personal achievement showcase. The elevator doors closed and I caught my reflection in the polished metal. I looked the same as I had this morning. Same simple blouse, same practical shoes, same face Mike had dismissed as junior staff. But everything had changed. By tomorrow morning, every employee would know. By tomorrow afternoon, every tenant would hear. And by tomorrow evening, Mike would be explaining to his networking contacts and golf buddies why his little sister was actually the person who'd been in control all along. I drove back to my apartment, the little place Mike loved to mock, which was actually a comfortable 2-bedroom I'd chosen because it was close to our East Side Plaza property and I liked being near the tenants I worked with daily. I'd have to consider moving eventually, I supposed. Controlling shareholders probably needed to maintain certain appearances. Then again, maybe not. Maybe that was exactly the kind of thinking that had led Mike to lease a BMW he couldn't actually afford and attend charity galas that did nothing for the business. My phone rang. Richard Thornton. Ms. Henderson, I wanted to follow up on something. Your brother submitted his resignation about 20 minutes ago. Very abrupt, very angry. I wanted to confirm how you'd like me to handle his departure. Accept the resignation, calculate the buyout value of his 12% stake according to our shareholder agreement, and have Arthur prepare the paperwork. Mike will be fine. 12% of this company is still worth approximately $35 million. He can find another company to pretend to run. Understood. And Emma? Yes. Your father would be incredibly proud. You honored his instructions perfectly, and you handled a very difficult situation with remarkable grace. After we hung up, I stood at my apartment window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Mike was probably calling every contact he had, trying to spin the situation into something that didn't make him look like he'd been operating under completely false assumptions for over a year. Somewhere out there, Mom was probably trying to process how her youngest daughter, the one she'd always described as sweet but not really business-minded, had just demonstrated more strategic thinking and business acumen in one meeting than Mike had shown in his entire career. And somewhere out there, Rosa Martinez was probably closing up her bakery, not knowing that the merger that would have displaced her had just been stopped by the nice girl from the leasing office, who always complimented her conscience. I smiled and turned away from the window. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tonight I'd celebrate quietly, the same way I'd done everything else for the last 5 years, with patience, preparation, and the absolute certainty that I'd earned every bit of authority I now held. My grandfather had been right about something else too. He told me once years ago that real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to be loud or flashy or constantly proven. Real power just is. And now finally everyone else knew it too.